Below is scene 1 expanded to approximately 1,000 words, written as continuous narrative without headings, as you requested. Dash dash dash. Victor Hale had spent his entire life believing that money could fix anything: breakthrough treatments, rare specialists, miracle machines hidden behind glass walls in elite private hospitals. But none of them had done a thing for the man who mattered most. Every morning began the same way. Arthur Hale gritting his teeth as he tried to rise from his bed, shoulders trembling from the effort, Victor standing helpless in the doorway, unsure whether to offer support or give his father the space he stubbornly demanded. Arthur had always been that way, proud, tough, a man built from blueprints and steel, not pity. Even when he'd been younger, he never allowed himself to be fussed over. But now his body betrayed him more with each passing week. His spine pinched nerves that left him gasping at random moments. His knees swelled painfully, refusing to support him without protest. Some days, he could barely walk from the bedroom to the kitchen. Victor tried everything. He brought in specialists from 3 countries. He installed handrails along the hallways. He even had an entire physical therapy suite built in the mansion. Arthur used it once and then refused to step inside again, muttering that he wouldn't turn into a lab rat in his own home. "I'm old, son," he would say, voice thick with a mixture of resignation and irritation. "That's all. Old bones hurt. That's life." But Victor saw more than age. He saw a man shrinking behind a wall of pain, losing parts of himself every day. The man who once spent hours tinkering with clocks, engines, and broken appliances now could barely hold a screwdriver. Sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, Arthur held his hands out in front of him, frustrated by how unsteady they'd become. What bothered Victor most wasn't the pain itself, it was the way Arthur hid it. When guests visited, Arthur straightened up, forced a smile, and made jokes as if nothing was wrong. When the staff offered to help him walk, he waved them away with that same dry sarcasm he'd had his whole life. "I still have legs," he'd say. "They just complain more than they used to." Only when alone did reality seep through. Only when the house quieted at night did Victor hear the low groans drifting from the master bedroom, the muffled thud of Arthur clinging to the furniture for support. Victor's wife, Elena, watched all of this with a stillness that made her difficult to read. She was elegant in the way that people from powerful families often were, composed, soft-spoken, a woman who never seemed caught off guard. Victor had married her knowing she was intelligent and loyal, but he had never known her to be sentimental. She didn't cry at movies, didn't linger over small gestures, didn't speak about her feelings easily. She loved in quiet ways, taking care of things before others even noticed they needed doing. Still, Arthur had never embraced her fully. He treated her politely but distantly, convinced she married Victor for his empire. And Victor, torn between the 2 people he loved most, never pushed Arthur to see otherwise. Weeks passed, and something strange began to bother Victor. Despite Arthur's refusal of outside help, despite the worsening pain, he seemed more at ease during the evenings. In the mornings, he winced at every step. By nightfall, he moved slower, yes, but calmer, less taut with suffering. Victor assumed it was just the pain medication timing. But the consistency of it gnawed at him. His father never admitted relief to anyone, so where was it coming from? One night, unable to sleep, Victor left the bedroom for water. The mansion was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a grandfather clock somewhere down the hallway. As he passed Arthur's room, he heard a soft murmur, a voice so gentle that for a moment he didn't recognize it. Then another sound followed, Arthur laughing. Laughing. Victor's heart lurched. He hadn't heard that laugh in months, not since before the pain had hardened his father's face into a grim mask. He moved closer, careful not to make the floorboards creak. The door was slightly ajar, leaving a narrow view into the dimly lit room. His father lay on the bed, propped up by pillows. His expression wasn't twisted with stubborn discomfort, but relaxed, almost peaceful. And kneeling beside him, sleeves rolled to her elbows, was Elena. Her usually immaculate hair was tied into a loose bun, wisps falling around her face. She held a small bowl of warmed oil, dipping her hands into it before gently massaging Arthur's swollen calves with slow, steady strokes. Arthur's eyes were half closed, his breathing deeper and easier than Victor had heard in months. "You don't have to do this, Elena," he murmured, his voice softer than Victor ever heard him speak to her. "I know," she replied, her tone almost a whisper. "But it helps. And you won't let anyone else near you." Arthur let out a breath that sounded like surrender. "It's embarrassing. It's human," she corrected softly. "Pain makes us all human." Victor's breath caught. He had never seen Elena like that, gentle, patient, almost maternal. She moved with a care that didn't ask for recognition, didn't expect gratitude. It wasn't the sterile efficiency of a professional caregiver. It was personal, tender. It was love in its quietest form. She massaged Arthur's legs, then his hands, flexing each stiff finger with a slow rhythm. Arthur, always so guarded, looked at her with something close to trust. And she looked at him with something close to devotion. Victor's throat tightened unexpectedly. This was a side of his wife he had never known. Not because she'd hidden it, but because he had never needed to see it, until now. She wasn't doing it for praise. She wasn't doing it to prove anything. She was doing it because his father was in pain and because she couldn't stand to watch him suffer alone. Victor stepped away quietly, his heart pounding. The shadows of jealousy, guilt, and gratitude tangled inside him. He wondered how many nights she had been doing this while he was buried in work or lying awake drowning in his own helplessness. He wondered why his father had accepted her touch when he refused help from everyone else. Maybe pain made pride crumble. Or maybe Elena had been slowly breaking through Arthur's walls with quiet persistence. That night, Victor understood something he had never realized before. He was not the only one fighting for his father. Elena had been fighting too. Not with money, not with doctors, but with tenderness. The kind that slipped unnoticed through the cracks pride left open. The kind Arthur didn't know how to ask for but clearly needed. And as Victor walked back to his room, he felt a shift inside him. The battle wasn't his alone. And the woman he thought he understood completely had just shown him a part of her heart he'd never seen, one that might save Arthur in ways medicine never could. Below is scene 2 expanded to approximately 1,000 words, written as a continuous narrative without headings, exactly as you requested. The storm rolled in with a force that made the windows rattle in their frames, as though the wind itself were trying to claw its way into the mansion. Thick sheets of rain blurred the world outside into a shifting wash of shadows and silver. Thunder rumbled through the vast halls, making the chandeliers tremble. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace clashed with the cold dread that had settled in Victor's stomach. Storms always made Arthur's pain worse, in ways no medication could fully soothe. Tonight, it struck harder than usual. Victor found his father in the study, sitting in his old leather armchair, the one that still carried faint scratches from the days when he had repaired watches at the workbench nearby. Arthur's hands were clenched on the armrests, his jaw tight, his breath uneven. Yet he stared into the fire as if trying to anchor himself to the glow, refusing to admit weakness even as tremors ran through him. The crackling flames cast long shadows over his features, softening the deep lines while emphasizing the toll of the pain. Victor stepped closer, heart sinking. "Dad, why didn't you tell me it's this bad again?" Arthur didn't look at him at first. His gaze stayed fixed on the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. "Because I didn't want to be your burden." The words landed like a stone in Victor's chest. All his life, he had looked up to Arthur as the man who could carry the world on his shoulders. The idea that Arthur thought of himself as a burden was almost unbearable. "You've never been a burden," Victor said firmly, though his voice wavered. "You're my father. Everything I am, everything I built, is because of you." Arthur's sigh was shaky, a sound of both pain and resignation. "Your life is too big for an old man's problems." His eyes flicked briefly toward Victor, full of exhaustion and an unspoken fear. "You have companies to run, decisions that matter. I won't drag you down." Victor knelt beside him, lowering himself until they were eye level. "None of that matters when it comes to you." He swallowed hard, pushing back the ache tightening his throat. "I can replace businesses. I can rebuild companies. But I only get one father." The fire cracked loudly, as if punctuating his words. Outside, the storm wailed against the house, yet in the study, the air grew still, heavy with the weight of things long left unsaid. Before Arthur could reply, soft footsteps approached. Elena appeared in the doorway, carrying a thick blanket over one arm and a warm compress in her hands. Her hair was slightly damp, as though she had rushed through the drafty corridors, and her expression was full of quiet purpose. There was no hesitation in her movements, no awkwardness around Arthur despite his earlier reluctance to rely on anyone. Arthur tensed instinctively at her presence, a flash of pride tightening his posture. "Elena, you don't need to come running every time I'm not running," she interrupted gently. "I'm here because you're family. And because you're in pain." Something in Arthur faltered at that word, family. It was a title he had always guarded carefully, often too carefully, but Elena offered it freely and without demand. She moved to his side with practiced calm, draping the blanket across his lap before pressing the warm compress to his lower back. Arthur winced at first, then exhaled slowly, the heat easing some of the tension locked inside his muscles. He didn't protest again. Victor watched as Elena adjusted the blanket and sat beside his father, her movements delicate yet confident. A strange warmth crept through him, a blend of gratitude, admiration, and guilt. He hadn't known how deeply she had been involved in caring for Arthur, not until he discovered her late-night rituals. She had stepped into the role silently, without asking for permission or recognition, simply because it was the right thing to do. For a long moment, the only sounds in the room were the steady drumming of the rain and the crackle of the fire. Arthur breathed slowly, letting the heat sink into him. Then he spoke, voice softer than Victor had ever heard it. "Elena, you know, I used to think you married my son for his money." Elena didn't flinch. She didn't pause. Her hands continued their careful, soothing movements. "I know," she said quietly. "I was wrong." The admission came out unsteady, as though he wasn't used to saying such things aloud. Arthur shook his head slightly, eyes glistening, not from pain this time, but something far more vulnerable. "You've done more for me than I ever expected. More than I deserve." Elena smiled, but it wasn't the polite smile she used with guests or business partners. It was small, sincere, and touched by something tender. "You deserve dignity," she said. "Comfort. Family. Warmth. You deserve all of that, Arthur. Everyone does." He blinked hard. His hands, which had been trembling earlier, grew steadier as he rested them on the blanket. "Thank you," he whispered. The words seemed to release something deep inside him, something he had carried for far too long. Victor felt his chest tighten, a thick swell of emotion rising inside him. For months, the house had felt divided by pain and distance. Now, for the first time, he sensed it healing. Elena shifted closer, resting a hand atop Arthur's. "You're not alone," she added softly. "Not anymore." Victor moved behind her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him briefly, eyes warm despite the fatigue. He leaned down and kissed her hair, whispering, "You've been saving him." She didn't look away from Arthur as she replied, "No. I've just been loving him." Outside, the storm began to ease. The rain softened, the thunder drifted farther away, and the house settled into a calmer rhythm. Arthur's breathing deepened, his body relaxing for the first time that night. The firelight danced over the three of them, father, son, and the woman who had stitched their fractures together without ever announcing her efforts. Victor stood quietly beside Elena, watching as his father drifted into sleep. There was no medication in the world that could have created this peace. No wealth that could have bought it. Only the presence of someone who cared enough to give comfort where pride had once built walls. As the flames flickered lower and the storm finally quieted, Victor understood something he had never fully grasped before: love wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the softest thing in the room. Sometimes it was a warm compress on a cold, stormy night. Sometimes it was a woman kneeling beside a man who had spent years holding everyone at a distance. And sometimes, it was exactly what a hurting soul needed to finally rest.